my PowerPoint and do share, and I'm going to do from beginning, and hopefully, can you all see that?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I've called it being an engaging researcher on Twitter, and it is. It's a shortened version of the talk that I gave to a load of PGRs at Durham a few weeks ago, and it went down well and seemed to be quite a useful talk for them. So I hope it'll be useful to you as well. So a quick summary of what I'll be talking about. So I'll do a quick intro to me, and then looking at Twitter, I'll explain kind of what Twitter is for. Essentially, I'll tell you my Twitter story, so how I started on Twitter and how I've been using it, and then I'll give some practical tips on the essential details of your profile, what kind of things to post, how to engage with other people on Twitter, and then a summary of the key points. So I'll try and do that all in about 20 minutes. I'm going to set my timer on this computer here so that I try and stay on track. Right, good. So I've got a question for you first. How many of you here are on Twitter? Is there a way of showing? I can't see all your hands, so I guess Callum can tell me.
Yeah. If anyone can see the emojis, then you can give a little emoji, a clap.
I do the emoji thing, yes.
Yeah.
Oh, there we are. I can see some raised hands. That's good. Okay, and so how many of you who have just raised your hand would say that you are active on Twitter? Is that fewer hands?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So it's good to have a sense of the landscape. So I'm assuming that most of you have some idea about Twitter, but maybe haven't always used it very much. But I'm hoping that what I'm telling you today is good, whether you're an experienced Twitterer or someone who is brand new to it. There's something there for all of you to take away, hopefully. So I told you I'd give you a brief intro to me, and actually my background did start in academia. So I did a master's in architecture and planning, and then I had various research roles in academia, and then I moved into a role in market research in a business, and that was when I first started to use Twitter. Actually, I used Twitter for the first time as a means of engaging with potential interviewees for some work I was doing. So I was using it in a quite academic research way, and then over time I've moved into running my own business, and now I'm a retail consultant. So if you see lots of examples in my tweets of retail stuff from the high street, that's because that's the area that I inhabit these days. And if you aren't following me already, here are my handles. As you got Soult, there is my main handle where I tweet a lot of stuff, mostly about retail, and then Canny Insights is where I kind of tweet stuff that's more to do with the whole business, really. So please do follow if you're not already. Right. So what is Twitter? I told you I would kind of ask that question, and I think I just need to move your thumbnail out the way so I can read it. Here we are. Right. Hang on. So it's a quote from the chief marketing officer of Twitter, and it says, "Twitter shows me what's happening in the world. Twitter shows me what's up. Twitter keeps me on the pulse, and Twitter keeps me informed. This is why people love Twitter." And it's quite a nice summary from the horse's mouth, and it reminds us that Twitter is all about being in the moment. It's all about stuff that's happening right now. But also it reminds us that actually it's the people who are on Twitter who are the source of all that information. It's why it's so democratic, in that everybody's voice is equal effectively. So a few facts about Twitter for you. Here's the first tweet. So it's from Jack, who said, "Just setting up my Twitter back in 2006. It was the first tweet." And from that very first tweet, there's now 500 million tweets a day, or 6,000 a second. And in fact, there'll be 7 million new tweets in the 20 minutes that I'm talking to you. So it's a very active profile. It's a very active platform that is being updated by people all the time. And you've got 152 million daily active users. So it is fewer than on Facebook or Snapchat. But I think in recent years, there's been all these stories about Twitter is dying. And I think it's not really the case. I think Twitter is in pretty good health, and that is borne out by the fact that it, as a company, it made a 1.5 billion pound profit in the last year. So it's not going anywhere. And of course, all of us are aware of certain people who are very active on Twitter, who help to popularize Twitter as a platform. You can probably guess who's going to appear in my next slide. Here he is. So it's making the point that Twitter isn't dead. It's where lots of important or interesting or influential people are having conversations and sharing updates in their own words. So I told you that I would talk about my Twitter story. So just very briefly, how my first tweet and things happened. So indeed, every Twitter journey starts with that first tweet, and in many cases, that first tweet probably looks something like this. So I wrote, "I'm finally signing up to Twitter after wondering for a long time whether I should do." So I think all of us have probably thought that. It's like, I think I should be on Twitter, but I'm not quite sure what it's for. I'm not quite sure what I'm meant to be putting on there. And that was my first tweet back in 2009. And then I kind of quoted that tweet in a talk I gave last year and just made that point that I think, plenty of businesses, plenty of individuals who I talk to have that barrier. It's the thing that often stops them using Twitter or starting Twitter, because they're not quite sure how to put stuff out there, how to stand out among all the noise that's going on. And I think, hopefully that's something that I'll address in my talk in the next few minutes. So in terms of my Twitter stuff, I'm pretty active. I was adding up all the tweets I've done, 68,000 tweets. 15,000 of those in the last year alone, so I'm pretty active on there. It's a community that I really engage with a lot. I've shared tweets worth 1.2 million words, so quite a few theses worth there. I've got 14,000 followers and half a million tweet views in the previous month alone. So all these numbers are good, because if you're on Twitter and you're wanting to be seen on Twitter, those kind of numbers are good. But it's really about what that means in your wider life, in your wider career. And I think what's important is that, through building up that following, through building up that profile on Twitter, it's allowed me to become what others say is an influencer. And so you've got all these things here, and it's really nice to appear in these lists of influencers sometimes, top 10 by global data, number 11 retail influencer in Europe, and all the rest of it. It's a nice endorsement that what you're putting out there is actually contributing something, and people are engaging with it, and people are finding it useful. And that's the kind of situation that I think anybody who is using Twitter wants to be in, where what you post is well received, and is starting debates, and is helping you build connections with useful and interesting people. And so here, for example, is a direct message I got from a journalist who I know at the Financial Times. And so that's the kind of thing that can happen if you start to build your profile in a given space. You become the go-to person, when someone has a question. And plenty of journalists are on Twitter, so it's a good place to go if you're wanting to get press coverage, for example. So here's the chap from the FT sent me a DM asking where Pound World went wrong back in 2018, and then later on there was a quote from me there in the FT, all done off the back of Twitter. So I've got so many relationships and friendships that have started off through a tweet. And sometimes, like that guy there, I've met him in real life now, but it wouldn't have happened if it hadn't been for Twitter first. And so by the end of my talk, I'm hoping that all of you will have some ideas of how you can build similar influence in your own academic fields. And so I'm going to take you through a few of the profile essentials and how to build a following. So even if you're already active on Twitter, hopefully some of these will be a useful checklist to make sure that you're doing all the right things. So here's a typical profile. That's my profile. So everyone has a Twitter handle or username. That's the bit that comes after the @. Ideally, it should be as short and straightforward as possible. So mine is just Soult, which is it's a good handle to have. It was a nice short one back in the early days of Twitter. Obviously, you can display your real name, and so your real name can be as long as you like. So your Twitter handle can be only 15 characters, but your actual name on display can be as long as you want. And you can, if you want. In my case, I put on kind of FIPM there to tell people that I'm a fellow of the Institute of Place Management, because in my industry, having those letters there helps to build credibility and helps to communicate what I do. A profile photo, ideally that should be a photograph that looks like you and is a quality picture of you in a reasonably professional environment, because again, how you appear there influences how people perceive you, and so ideally you should use the same photograph if you can across your kind of professional network. So use the same one on Twitter and on LinkedIn if you can, for example. The header photo there is a space where you can put a picture of your choice. I've included my logo in there as well. I created a graphic beforehand and uploaded that. And it's worth being aware that if you do have a header photo, it might get cropped differently on different devices. So if you go online, there are all kinds of resources you can refer to for the ideal dimensions of your header photo. So that if you are wanting to include a logo or some text or whatever, you can make sure that it all falls in the safe area. The bio bit, the bit underneath your name, is basically a summary of who you are, and again, that can be quite good. It doesn't give you all that much space, but you can include hashtags in there. You can include other Twitter handles. So I've got retail consultant at Canyon Insights, so that if someone wants to link through to that profile, they can do as well. And basically, it's kind of setting out your stall. So if you want to talk about your academic research, but also about football and Eurovision or whatever, you can, if you put that in your profile, it kind of gives you, it's saying to people, I'll talk mostly about research, but also these other things that are important to me. And so what you put in there is a good indicator of keeping things on topic. Your locations, that's where you are. If you want to include that, you might as well, because sometimes you'll find that it's good to build a network of people in your locality. So in my case, because I'm well networked in the Northeast, I like to build links to other people who I know are in Gateshead or Durham or Newcastle, so on. And the website bit, again, if you don't have a website, it's good to put your LinkedIn in there. That's a useful thing to include as well. Who to follow? Often one of the first things that you get on Twitter is, okay, I've created my account, now what do I do? And so who to follow, obviously you start off really with who you already know. So if you've got people who are friends, colleagues, who you know on Twitter, start off by following them. Think about, are there particular professors or academics or authors or other important people in your field who are on Twitter? Search for those and follow them as well. And equally, if you know there are other people doing similar things to you, so for example, in my case, I told you that I'm a fellow of the IPM. So if I go and look at who is following IPM, I can see people who are clearly interested in place management. I can follow them because the chances are that they might follow me back if they're interested in what IPM is doing. It's quite likely they'll also be interested in what I'm doing. What to post? So here's it's a quick summary of the key things to post. So it's really I used that quote at the start about what Twitter is, and I think it's very much a case of being timely, talking about things that are happening now, but also about being on topic. So you've set out in your description kind of what it is that you do. So try and own that niche. So in my case, if you follow my tweets, you'll see that a lot of them are about the high street, about retail. And so I try and post about that all the time, often with a Northeast perspective as well. If you can, put original photos and videos in there, because it's well known that posts that have an image in there tend to do better than ones that are just text. Hashtags are good because again, it helps people discover your posts. So if you in my case, to include hashtag retail or hashtag high street can help my posts be seen by people who are looking for things about that topic, or if it's a trending topic, they can click through and see it in the feed. Tag or mention relevant people. So in this particular case, I tagged Durham BID, the Business Improvement District, because I thought my post would interest them. And if you can, have a call to action. So try and give people a point of doing something after your tweet. So it might be click through here for more information, or what do you think? Either having a reason to kind of click something, or starting a conversation with people. And engaging with others. So that's a really important part of Twitter. It's not just a case of putting stuff out there. It's all about the conversations. And certainly posting stuff is only really a small part of what Twitter is about. It's all about building those networks and relationships. And so again, here's our friend Trump, and it's worth using him as an example of someone who is a broadcaster rather than an engager. So he puts stuff out there all the time, but he never replies to anyone. It's very much a case of Twitter is where Donald Trump kind of shares his own thoughts, but he doesn't really have conversations. And so that point about having to engage in order to influence is really important, and something I can't emphasize enough. And there are ways you can do that. So if you're on Twitter, you'll see that if there's someone else's tweet that you like, you can retweet it, as it is, so that in effect, someone else's tweet appears in your feed just as as coming from them. Or if you want to kind of add your own thoughts to a tweet that someone else has written, like I have here in this example, you can do a retweet with comment. And that can be a very effective way of furthering debate, but also engaging with whoever it is you're quoting. So it might be that if you've got some kind of author or academic who has posted a timely and interesting tweet that you think is very good or interesting, you can quote that tweet and kind of add your own slant, to quote your own example, or to say what you think is very good about it. The quoting is a good way of kind of being seen and building and I suppose kind of pinging those people who you're wanting to kind of engage with, because it just gives them a little nudge that you quoted their tweet. Share and comment on topical issues. So here, for example, I shared a link from Retail Week about a really interesting news story about the high street being transformed in Stockton-on-Tees. And again, it might be that you've got a really interesting kind of academic paper that you've found, or an event that you're going to. And again, if you share that link with a comment, it can be a good way of showing your kind of thought leadership, if you like, and your profile in that particular area of work. And reply to people. That's so important. So I told you that Trump never replies. I nearly always reply, or at least I like the tweet that someone has put, because I kind of think that if you're wanting to build relationships with people, it's no good posting things having them reply to you and then ignoring it. It's only polite to kind of have that conversation. And again, the number of times that I've developed really productive relationships, even gained work contracts off the back of having those conversations on Twitter. So if you put the effort in, it really can pay back in terms of building those relationships with useful people who can potentially be a really important part of your career down the line. And selectively retweet. So again, it's a good way to get on the radar of those people who are important. So I often retweet George McDonald. He's the editor of Retail Week. So in my particular field, he's a bit of a guru. He's one of the most important retail people on Twitter. So by engaging with him, I've built up a relationship with him over time. Now he calls me sometimes and says, Graham, can I get a quote for you for Retail Week magazine? So it was all done, by being seen by him on Twitter. How are we doing? 1 minute, 12 seconds. Right, I'm nearly there. How do you manage Twitter as your following grows? That's an important question, because one of the things that people often get baffled about on Twitter is is how do you cope with having thousands of followers? You know, how do you scroll through your feed and make sense of it? It only really works as long as you're following about 100 people. Any more than that, and it starts to get unmanageable, and you can't cope with it. But there's a way to. But if you employ Twitter lists, that's a way of making it, you know, all more organized. And so a Twitter list is a curated group of Twitter users, and a great way to organize your interest. That's a quote from Twitter itself. And if you go onto Twitter, and you'll see in the left-hand margin on the computer, it will have it's got lists in the menu, and you can create a list there on whatever topic you want. So how it works is that you can go in and create your list, either public or private. So a public list is maybe where you want to curate a list of people or accounts to show that you're an expert in a particular field. So for example, you know, I've got a list of all the accounts that I manage. I've also got a list of really important retail people that is a private list. And so what I do in the morning is go through my list of important retail people and see what those people are saying. So it's a curated list of 150 accounts rather than the 14,000 that I follow. And it means that through that window of 150 odd people, I basically get a snapshot of all the important stuff that's happening. And it's very easy to add people to a list. All you do is you click on those three dots at the top of the profile there, and do basically add to list. So I've cantered through all the list bit awfully quickly, but if you want to find out more, there is an article there, and so you'll get these slides afterwards anyway, and you can click on that. And it's an article I wrote a few years ago, but it's still relevant about how Twitter lists work and what to use them. And it's still a good read, I think. So a quick summary of what I've cantered through today in 20 minutes, and I've more or less looked at time. So I've explained you know, how to hone your profile by getting all the ingredients right in terms of your kind of pictures and your bio and the rest of it. I've explained how to proactively and methodically follow people, you know, building up a following of people who you know, people who are following, you know, others like you. And then you can build your influence and your following and your thought leadership in whatever field you have by, first of all, you know, posting good tweets, posting great content that people kind of want to read, you know, actively engaging with others, doing all the things I was talking about, quoting tweets, retweeting, replying. And then, you know, if you get to the point where you're following too many people, make sense of all of that by organizing your network into chunks using these lists. You can create as many lists as you want around whatever topics you like, public or private, and it's a fantastic way of bringing some order to what on the face of it can be a rather overwhelming platform. There we are. So I've more or less stuck to my schedule, and those are my details. And you know, please do get in touch if you have any particular questions you want to follow up with. And of course, if you want to kind of ask me or comment or anything on Twitter, then by all means do. So I'm going to stop sharing that, and then I can see you again, because it's always a bit weird in that I'm presenting at the moment and I can't see you. So I hope you're all still there.
That's
there
great.
We are.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Graham. So now we're completely open to questions. Feel free you can wave, unmute yourself, just go for it. If it's all right, I'd like to sort of start with a few questions, which really is sort of, I think when you sort of initially, if anyone like me has sort of thought, I'm going to Google how I can sort of build a Twitter following or do X, Y, and Z, I think there's a lot of things that are potentially myths that actually might not actually happen or things like that. So a few things I wanted to ask were, first of all, does it matter about sort of like a follower ratio, in the sense that should you be following loads of people? Should you be following no one and getting loads of followers? Should you be following people and then unfollowing them later on once they followed you back? Things like that. And then the part two of that question is, can you tweet too much? So the same process. Is there like an optimum number of tweets?
Okay, good. Right. So to answer the first question, Twitter will, if you try and follow too many people, Twitter will tell you off anyway. So it'll say, whoa, stop there. And so ideally, it's better if you're if your followers and following can be a similar number. And you have some people like Trump, for example, you know, who will have millions of followers, but who won't follow anyone back. My particular approach is that if someone follows me, you know, if they're vaguely interesting, I will follow them back. So I'm quite open about that, and I don't do all the jiggery pokery of following and then unfollowing, because that's nonsense, really. What I do though, I use a tool. I think it's called tweepsmap.com. So tweeps, tweepsmap.com. And what that does is it lets you log in on that platform, and it lets you see who among your following hasn't tweeted in the last 6 months. So what I do, if someone has been kind of inactive on Twitter for a long time, I will unfollow them. And so doing that helps me kind of prune the numbers down a bit, and avoid getting too big a gap between the followers and the following. And then to answer your other question about how many tweets, I think the joy of Twitter is that it's hard to do it too often. So I think if you're on LinkedIn or a Facebook, or on a Facebook business page, you can easily overdo it. You wouldn't want to share perhaps more than 3 or 4 times a day max. Whereas Twitter, it's really a case of, you know, if you have something useful to say, or you want to retweet something that is relevant and interesting, do it. Because actually, I think, you know, I do a lot of retweeting, but then I think people like that because they know that in a way my account is almost a one-stop shop. So it gives them a snapshot of what's happening in the world of retail and high street. So I think it's hard to overdo it, really.
That's great. Islam, I saw that I got a notification. I didn't even know you could do this on Zoom, where it said you had a question. You can go for it.
Yes, so I started actively using Twitter 3 weeks ago, and that's the reason I'm here, actually, because I got a message from Scientistt. It's probably Callum who messaged me. So one thing I realized that it takes up a lot of time, engaging, writing posts. So I want to ask you, like, how do you find that balance? Like, how much time do you spend on Twitter? Because you have to engage to get more followers and all that, especially when there is an argument that takes a lot of time as well. So when do you realize, like, okay, I can't spend too much time on Twitter, I have to work on other things? So that balance is something I haven't figured out.
It's a good question. I think I'm fairly structured in that I explained about my list there, the kind of retail important people list. And basically, I just go through that on my phone every morning while I have coffee. So I'm kind of doing it while I'm doing something else anyway. Or if I'm on a bus or a train, it's a good time to use it as well. But I suppose, I have Twitter open most of the day on my computer because I work from home. I'm self-employed, so actually I get great value, particularly in lockdown, actually, of having that community there and being pinged by people all the time. It's nice to know that you've got people, you know, who are there to support you and to talk to. But I think if you're wanting to be disciplined, just do a stint in the morning and maybe a stint around tea time, and turn it off in the middle. So it's really a question of what you want to do. But yes, I think sometimes it can be distracting. So I have occasions where I just close Twitter and don't look at it for a few hours if I'm trying to get on with writing something.
Cheers, Graham. I'll just take over from Callum, and then Callum needs to do some work. Can I just follow on from what you answered to Callum? So some of the popular accounts that come on Twitter, they say like follow Friday kind of thing. So they'll encourage you to follow as many people as possible. So like, just like a bit of extension of what he said, is there something that you'd encourage to get involved, where you just follow people just for the sake of getting on the trend?
No, not really. I tend to say follow people who you're going to find genuinely interesting. So usually, you know, I follow people who are doing stuff around retail and place management, people who are from the Northeast, people who I might have some other shared interest with. And sometimes I'll see an account and think, well, there's not much point in following them because I I don't really care about what they're doing. You know, it's not relevant to me. So I think it can be good to engage in those kind of hashtags and Twitter hours and things. So for example, during lockdown, I've been running a Twitter hour called Network Northeast, and that has been quite focused. You know, it's focused on bringing together business people in the northeast of England. And so a focused thing like that can be really good. And it might well be that you have Twitter hours and hashtags and things happening for certain areas of your research, or perhaps you have one of your institution or whatever. So I think if you can find these things that are relevant to you and that give you a shortcut to finding people who are useful, then that's good. But I certainly don't advocate following people in a random way. Just stick to those who are interesting and relevant and useful.
Definitely, I think I agree with that a lot as well. Does anyone else have a question?
Hi, I have a question.
Hi,
what do you think in terms of like what makes a buzz on Twitter? Like what kind of gets the most traction? What do you think you could do to get the most traction on Twitter?
It's a good question. I suppose certainly if you happen to be able to engage with a trending topic, that can be very effective. So I guess all of you probably saw the headlines a week or two ago about John Lewis closing its store in Birmingham, and so you know, I put out a tweet with some photographs of when I'd been there 5 years ago when it opened, and that tweet went a bit crazy. So that's my one tweet got 170,000 views, which is my highest ever, I think. So it was just lucky that the trending topic happened to be something that I would naturally write about anyway. But if you can't do that, I think just the more that you build your network, the more your tweets will get engagement. So it's that thing of when you first start, you're almost tweeting to nobody because you've got an account there, but you don't have a following yet. But you know, over time, people will follow you because they want to hear you know, all that you have to say, and then it just takes one or two of those to retweet you, and then it's very easy for a tweet to get a good traction of several thousand views perhaps. So it takes time, but you know, if you stick at it and you stick to your niche and you become seen as a kind of expert and a really kind of nice and interesting person in whatever field you are in, you know, it pays back eventually.
Cheers, Graham. Does anyone else have any questions? Can I ask you, in that case, can I ask you another question on that, Graham?
Of course, yeah.
Would you have any strategy on, like you said, like you got that 170,000 something interactions. So do you have any strategy in terms of SEOs, like how you use content marketing kind of thing? So is there tweets as well, relevant topics that you can tweet to go viral?
Yeah, it's a good question. I suppose I do have a bit of a strategy across different platforms. I think, like looking at the chat, I think there was someone there who was asking about should we use one social media platform or multiple, and that actually is an important question because I tend to try and join things up. So I was talking about how I use the same photograph across the platforms, and my personal brand is consistent. But then I use LinkedIn a lot. I use Twitter a lot. I post kind of blogs sometimes on the website as well. So I try and cross promote things. So if I've written a blog, for example, that is something that is then really good to share on Twitter and LinkedIn as well. And so yeah, I think I try and drive traffic you know, to my website as well, because again, I want people to see what I'm doing on there. I want people to, you know, hopefully kind of pay for my services if they want to for all the various things that I offer. So it is quite joined up. And then obviously I've got my Canny Insights account too, so I can almost retweet myself. So again, it can be quite useful at times having a personal account and a kind of brand one, because then it lets you kind of cross tweak between the two, and to maybe kind of amplify what you're putting out there. But I think like my overall approach really is to just kind of be seen as someone who knows his stuff, who is a leading voice, in the kind of high street debate, and through doing Twitter and LinkedIn and articles, and through sharing the things, all these things where I appear in the press as well, I share those on social media. It just builds up a picture of me as someone who is hopefully kind of leading debates, in that field, and is a bit of an expert in that field. And that, I suppose, is the outcome that you want. And so I never sell anything. I never say, I'm Graham and I offer this, because the best way to sell on social media is to not sell. So if you're just kind of interesting, and you show through what you're sharing your kind of knowledge and intellect and experience in all these things, that is what you're selling effectively. And if people are impressed by that, they will go and look at your website and make contact and say, Graham, can you help with this?
That's really insightful. That's really so something as a research student that I could do then. For example, if my research is based on cancer research, right? So I follow the relevant accounts like Cancer Research UK and things like that. So then would you encourage me to interact with them, like give my insight on an article they're sharing, so that, like you said, retweet them and things like that, so that I get their attention, and then maybe they contact me to get a certain view? Is that something you recommend, even if I'm a PhD student and think I'm not confident enough that, a big academic or big society would find my views relevant?
Yeah, exactly. And the joy of Twitter is like the example of George from Retail Week. On the face of it, I started on Twitter. I had no profile at all in the retail space, and all these people felt like they were kind of way up here and I was down here. But over time, you realize that actually you can earn your place among these important people, and so the power of Twitter is that it's very democratic. Everyone's accounts are the same, really. So I think certainly if you want to be seen by Cancer Research or by maybe academics or whatever who are in that field, Twitter is a very democratic way of potentially being seen. And not all of them will engage with you, but it's quite likely that in some cases it will get you on their radar. And certainly increasingly in the things I've been doing at Durham University, there's lots of talk about how few PhD researchers will go on to work in academia, and that actually, many are going to go on and work in business somehow. And so I think Twitter is very good if you're thinking that you might want to build a career in business or start your own business or whatever else it might be. Building those networks on Twitter already can be a very effective way of getting your name known. And you never quite know, it could be that one of those contacts that you build already, could be a gateway into a fantastic job or a fantastic opportunity in the future, or a speaking gig at a conference and things. Again, I've been asked to speak at so many things off the back of being seen on Twitter. So it's a great shop window for what you do.
That's great. Islam, did you have another question? Sorry, I got a notification.
Oh yeah, just a quick one. So given the current political, environment, situation in the US, I've seen people they post about something that they agree on a policy, and then they lose hundreds of followers, and they say things like, "I don't care about you all because you don't agree with me." So I was wondering, what do you have to say about that? Should you try to focus on everyone, try to get your message out, or have people that agree with your policy? I don't know about how things are in the UK, but in the US, it's political correctness and policies is a very important, especially right now.
It's a good question, because certainly in the area of work that I'm in, I have to be increasingly careful not to comment really on political stuff, because I have clients who I know are different extremes of the spectrum. You know, people who are pro Brexit, anti Brexit, people who who have all kinds of different views. So I try and stay quite neutral and stay out of controversial things as far as I can. And it's an important thing to think about, because I see businesses out there who spend more time tweeting about politics than they do about their business, and I find that a bit kind of inappropriate, really. I don't want to know that the guy who runs the shop in my town kind of hates Boris Johnson. I want to know what he's selling, or what experience I'm going to get in store. So I think it's important to be careful not to stray too far outside your niche, and that's why I was saying it's important to define on Twitter kind of what it is you'll be talking about, and as far as possible, try and stick to that rather than becoming too embroiled in other things. And it might be that if you really want to get embroiled in politics and controversy, it might be that you have a separate personal Twitter account, under an alias, where you do that rather than doing it under your real name, because often these things can come back to haunt you if you post stuff there that is seen to be controversial or inappropriate later.
Nice one. Does anyone have any final questions or anything like that? Just conscious of the time.
Can I ask one final question?
Mm-hmm.
Graham, I think a lot of people might be thinking this. How do you get that coveted the Twitter verification, that the blue tick? Do you have any advice?
The blue tick, yes, that's a good question. Well, it used to be fairly straightforward in that you could fill in a form basically and request it. So originally I think it was Twitter kind of realizing that certain people were important and giving them the tick automatically. So clearly, if Twitter knows that an account is Boris Johnson or Donald Trump, it will give the tick automatically. But it was open to abuse, and so a few years ago they stopped doing any more kind of applications for blue ticks, because I think people who were quite well known but quite controversial were acquiring a blue tick, and people were perceiving that as a Twitter endorsement rather than Twitter saying this person is who they claim they are. So at the moment, there's no way that someone like me can acquire a blue tick unless Twitter deems itself that I'm important enough. But I think they are working on a new system of blue ticks. But it doesn't make a lot of difference really. I've got people in my industry who have a blue tick, but if they have a blue tick but actually are quite an objectionable person, who doesn't engage and who isn't nice to chat to, mm-hmm. and isn't saying things that people want to hear, then a blue tick doesn't mean much.
Very true. Yes, thank you.
That's great. Yeah, so I think we'll call it there with the questions. Thank you so much, Graham, for the presentation.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop the recording